You ever wonder why the quiet ones walk like they're carrying a whole collapsing world inside the ribcage? Not the dramatic, loud kind of pain, not the cinematic breakdowns you see in movies, but the kind that sits behind the eyes, like an old winter that never fully thawed. If you're a quiet adult, you already know this. You didn't choose silence the way someone chooses a fashion trend. It grew on you, the same way bone fractures grow on survivors of long-forgotten impacts. Invisible to everyone else, but unmistakable in the way you move through life. Here's the part nobody says out loud. Quiet adults often carry the heaviest childhood trauma because silence was never a personality trait. It was a survival tactic, carved into you during those years when your nervous system was still wiring itself like an early warning grid in a war zone. You learned early that noise meant danger, emotions meant unpredictability, and visibility meant vulnerability. So you built your own blackout protocol. You dimmed the lights, lowered the volume, and taught yourself to vanish into the smallest possible version of who you were. Not because you were weak, but because you were observant in a house where observation was the only safety mechanism available. Growing up in an environment like that trains your brain the same way living in a long-term disaster zone trains a survivor. You develop hypervigilance, the psychological equivalent of always checking the horizon for smoke. This works because your amygdala, the part of the brain that handles threat detection, becomes overdeveloped compared to the logical prefrontal cortex. So even decades later, as an adult sitting in a quiet room, your nervous system still behaves like everything could collapse with one wrong word. That's why you rehearse conversations before they happen, why you scan faces for micro-expressions, why your silence is not empty. It's a highly calibrated monitoring system. There's a survival technique quiet adults excel at, though most of them never recognize it as one: environmental reading. In a traumatic childhood, you become a master of interpreting tone, pacing, posture, even the tension in the air before someone enters the room. This works because humans emit subtle cues long before they speak. And when you grow up needing to predict danger, your brain becomes a near military-grade pattern detector. It's the same neurobiological mechanism used by trackers in wilderness survival. They read broken twigs, you read broken moods. This section is based on practical field survival experience rather than formal academic sources. Another hidden survival skill: emotional rationing. In unstable households, expressing emotions is like lighting a match in a room filled with unknown gas leaks. So you learn to store everything, pack it tight, and bury the crate deep underground. As an adult, this becomes an internal bunker stocked with feelings you never let anyone see. You don't cry easily, not because you're strong, but because the release valve fused shut from years of disuse. Yet, emotional rationing has consequences. The body cannot store fear indefinitely. Cortisol accumulates, sleep becomes fragmented, and you begin experiencing exhaustion that feels less like tiredness and more like the aftermath of a long siege on your own nervous system. The system works, but only until it doesn't. Quiet adults also pick up the survival method of conflict invisibility, the ability to shrink your presence when tensions rise. It's the psychological version of camouflage, and it's incredibly effective in childhood. When adults around you explode, disappear. When voices rise, become a shadow on the wall. The problem is that when you grow up, your brain still thinks conflict equals annihilation. You'll avoid difficult conversations even when they would save your relationships. You'll stay silent in moments where your voice would change everything. This works because your nervous system prioritizes safety over connection, a hierarchy forged long before you understood you even had choices. Then there's the habit of self-containment. Quiet adults learn to do everything alone because depending on chaotic caregivers was like relying on faulty generators during a blackout. You never knew when the support would fail, so you stopped expecting it. As an adult, this shows up as hyper-independence. You fix your own problems, carry your own weight, and build your life like a private bunker.
But humans aren't built for solitary survival. The same way a single camper in the wilderness faces twice the risk of injury, isolation erodes your resilience over time. You start thinking no one will help, so you don't ask. Then you resent that no one ever steps in. You've become your own rescue team, whether you wanted to or not. Another trait, emotional dissociation. In a childhood filled with unpredictability, detaching is the psychological equivalent of reducing oxygen consumption during a long winter starvation. You numb out to survive. You detach to float above the moment. It protects you short-term, but long-term it leads to feeling like you're observing your life through bulletproof glass. You're present, but not fully. You feel, but not deeply. You care, but cautiously. This works because your brain learned to shut down higher emotional processing in exchange for raw survival reflexes. And the older you get, the harder it is to locate the authentic version of yourself buried under all that insulation. But perhaps the heaviest burden quiet adults carry is the survival belief that their needs don't matter. Childhood trauma whispers convincing lies, that your comfort is a nuisance, your sadness is dramatic, your boundaries are rude. You internalize these messages until even asking for water feels like an intrusion. As an adult, this turns into chronic self-neglect. You postpone rest, you minimize your pain, you silence your hunger. You take up less space in your own life because the blueprint was written by people who never taught you how to inhabit your body without fear.
Yet, here's the uncomfortable truth. These survival traits, forged in childhood storms, also become your strengths in adulthood, if you learn how to rewire them. Hypervigilance becomes situational awareness. Emotional rationing becomes emotional intelligence when you finally understand how to release pressure in safe environments. Conflict invisibility transforms into strategic calm once you learn that not every disagreement is a battlefield. Hyper-independence becomes leadership when you understand collaboration isn't a threat. Dissociation can be reversed with grounding, turning your mind back into a home instead of a bunker. And the belief that your needs don't matter, that one takes the longest to unlearn because it's written in the oldest layers of your psychological architecture. But when you start rewriting it piece by piece, something remarkable happens. The silence that once protected you becomes the silence you choose. Not the quiet of fear, but the quiet of control. Not the quiet of invisibility, but the quiet of deep, steady presence. You stop being a ghost walking through your life and start becoming a fully conscious survivor of your own past. The reason quiet adults carry the heaviest childhood trauma isn't because they're fragile. It's because they adapted too well. They built survival systems inside themselves that no longer match the world outside. Systems that once saved them, but now imprison them. But any system can be rewired. Any bunker can be opened. And anyone who learned to survive without support can learn, slowly, painfully, beautifully, to live with it.